The knowledge that an internal auditor must have is divided again in three parts. First, we will discuss all those subjects where the internal auditor should have some sort of working knowledge. Okay, the basic concepts of those subjects should be very clear to an internal auditor. Then there are certain subjects where the internal auditor should have expert knowledge. And lastly, there are a few topics where an internal auditor must have advanced level knowledge. Without that, the effectiveness of the internal auditor's work will not be as great. So, what are the subjects where you require working knowledge? We'll discuss one by one, and we'll also discuss certain examples in relation to each of them. So, working knowledge mein first subject that you should have working knowledge is business processes. Since internal auditor does audit of businesses, and businesses are run through standard processes, having a basic understanding of how these business processes function, what are these processes, what are the steps involved in various business processes, is a must for internal auditor. So to give you an example, the processes include the entire process right from ordering till receiving of the money against your sales. So sales order to cash, the entire cycle, which is also known as O2C, order to cash cycle, is something that you should be aware of. Similarly, you should be aware of the procure to pay cycle, the process where the procurement starts and it ends with the payment of the suppliers. That entire process you should understand. You should understand the hire to retire process, which is relating to the human resources of the organization. Then there are other processes, in example, logistics, supply chain. Then you have your production, maintenance, quality control. These are all operational related core processes. Then there are support functions, for example, accounts team. Then you have your IT department, systems. Then there is human resource and administration that we discussed. There is payroll. These functions act as a support function for your core processes. So core as well as support, both should be known to the internal auditor. The processes involved in those, what are the steps involved in execution of those processes, should be known to the internal auditor.
So in business processes, it's understanding about the entire process of that department. When he said about order to cash, so you are looking at how the sales order is generated, how it is recorded, then how it is processed or executed. That means selling it to the customer, and how it is billed. Okay, and finally how the payment is received. So this entire process, the basic fundamentals of this entire process has to be known to the internal auditor before he starts doing a process walkthrough with the process owner.
Right. So for the benefit of the students, we have decided to launch additional courses which will be specific to each business process. For example, there will be a course on how to audit the order to cash process, how to audit the procure to pay process, how to audit production, how to audit quality control, and so on. So I'm sure students will be able to find that of value and go through those courses as well once they have completed the basic course on the internal audit. Okay. So the next area is management policies. So similar to business processes, management would also set certain policies within the organization. Policies are documents that guide decision making process. So it is basically a guideline given by the management to the down level employees or managers on how to take decisions in what situations. These policies are something that you should be able to easily understand in order to be able to audit those departments and functions properly. So your understanding of these policies should be very clear of whatever organizations you are auditing.
Right. So the auditing starts with the management policies. So first the auditor reads through the policies and procedures of the organization, and that helps him to get a basic idea on how the organization is functioning. After it gets a basic idea, it gets into the business process understanding with each of the process owners. So the scope of audit, the way the organization is functioning, is all defined through this management policies and procedures.
Right. Next we have MIS reporting. Now MIS reporting is management information system. These are reports which are prepared by managers and presented to the management, or it could be by people down the line who are reporting it to the managers. Why you should be able to understand these reports is because the figures, facts and figures which are to be audited are contained in these reports. So if you are able to read these reports well, if you know where to extract what reports from, and you understand the basic structure of these reportings, you'll be able to audit better. So your understanding of numbers will come from these MIS reports.
So these MIS reports are basically the decision making tools for the management. So based on the policies and procedures, certain processes are followed, and those processes result in some report that is generated through the system. Those reports are produced before the management for decision making.
Right.
Now these decision making tools help the management in taking decisions for the future. For example, in an MIS report may contain what is the sales that the company has achieved, what are the receivables that are pending, where the money has to be collected from the customers, where the amounts have to be paid to the suppliers. So all these amounts are reported in these MIS reports. They help the management to understand what is the cash flow of the organization, what are the future action that it has to take to manage its working capital or to liquidate its inventory.
Right. Next is the ERP systems. So ERP stands for Enterprise Resource Planning. This is a category of software which is used to record data across the organization. It is an integrated software which encompasses each and every department of an organization, right from your procurement, planning, production, inventory management, then your supply chain, your logistics, your sales, and your accounts. All are integrated together in a single software, and entries flow, the data in those entries flow from one department to another within the ERP system. So as an auditor, you should be having a good working knowledge on how these ERP systems function, because when you start your audit, you will be given access to the ERP system to view reports, to see the transaction flows. You should be able to understand how these are functioning. You should be knowing how to extract data from the ERP systems and then analyze them.
Right. So these ERP systems are, some of you would be knowing them, like a Tally, which is an ERP system, but it's an accounting system. You can still use it for cash order processing, or sales order processing, or purchase order processing, which can happen through Tally. So it's an ERP system because it goes beyond the accounting software. Right. Similarly, there are other systems like SAP. So those systems also help in integrating the various functions of the organization into a single database. So that's an ERP system. These ERP systems are important for the management to get regular MIS reports, which we discussed previously, for decision making.
So, whatever we have discussed so far, if you look at them, business processes, management policies, MIS reports, ERP systems, these will be client specific. So, when we say you should have working knowledge of these, your duty would be to study these documents or these systems before you start an audit. We will be covering that in the execution portion of the module. But I'm just saying, for your understanding, this is something that you need to know when you're starting an audit. So it will be an exercise where you learn these documents first, study them, understand them well, gain some knowledge, and then you initiate your audits. Then the commercial and tax laws which are applicable to the organization that you're auditing. This is again very basic and very valid, since ensuring compliance is one of the important objectives of internal controls, and effectiveness of that is what we evaluate. Having knowledge of what commercial and tax laws are applicable to a company is very important. You should be knowing the laws of the land, and ensuring that the companies are complying with those basic requirements of those laws. We don't expect you to be an advanced level expert on these laws, because those are specialized areas. For example, if you talk about GST or you talk about income tax, there are specialized experts on these areas which would know much better than what you would know, but still your basic knowledge of these laws is important, so that you can at least do the compliance reviews of all the things which are applicable to the company,
Right.
in terms of compliance requirements. And lastly, the function of finance is something that you should have a working knowledge of, because finance is an integral part of your entire transaction flow. Wherever there is a transaction that involves monetary value, like there are payments, there are receipts, there are orders placed, there are invoices booked, all these transactions have got money in it. Okay, so you need to understand finance really well. Where is the money coming from? Where is it going? How is it processed? How is it documented? How is it recorded in the ERP system? You need to have knowledge of that, and you should be able to analyze financial transactions well.
Right. So in finance, also, and having a basic understanding of the financial ratios are very critical for the internal auditor, because through these ratios, it can identify what are the potential areas which need to be looked into in detail. So these financial ratios help the internal auditor to understand whether the MIS reports are going correctly, whether the accounting or whether the ERP systems are functioning the way it should. So it's very important for an auditor to understand financial ratios and recommend what is essential for the management to improve them.
Right. Okay, last is IT and information security. So again, in today's time, information technology and information and data in general is something which has become an integral part of every organization. So data is collected, it is stored, it is analyzed, it is processed, it is retrieved and reported, and all the systems which are used to manage these transactions are IT systems. You need to have the basic understanding of how these IT systems function, how the companies try and keep them secure to prevent data theft, to ensure integrity of the data. So what are data servers, how these servers interact with the client, how the data moves through various networks within the organization. A basic simple knowledge of these systems is something important for you to ensure that you integrate it as a part of your audit.
Right. So
Yeah.
IT and information security is just not a separate area, but it has to be embedded in each of the functions that you audit. Even if you are doing a procurement or a sales audit, IT and information security is important because data is generated through various sources.
Right.
It has some data is there in the ERP system, some data would be there in your Google Drive, some data would be on your desktop. So you need to check whether the IT security policy of the company is being followed, whether the data saved at various places is secured. So in short, IT and information security has to be covered in each of your audit areas.
Right. Now, apart from these, there are certain other areas where the level of knowledge required is expert knowledge. So we'll look into those. What are those? Okay. One is management principles. So you need to be aware of what all management principles are applied in a business. The basic ones are planning, organizing, staffing, directing, controlling, or monitoring. These management principles have to be clear in order to understand the operations of the organization, how things function, how basically an organization functions in order to achieve its objectives. So, expert level knowledge is required as far as these concepts are concerned. Then second is internal controls. So you need to have good knowledge of what are internal controls. We have an entire module which covers internal controls. We'll be discussing this in detail. Then you should be having good expert level knowledge of the entire risk management concept. So enterprise wide risk management is where how the risk concept of risk management applies to an entire enterprise, the entire organization, across its departments and functions, and across entire hierarchy of the organization. Again, we have an entire module dedicated to risk management where we'll be covering those. And lastly, you should have expert knowledge of the accounting principles and techniques. So in short, you should be a good accountant. You should understand the basic golden rules of accounting very well. You should be having good knowledge of how transactions flow within an accounting system. And you should have a good understanding of how financial statements are prepared, how the ledgers and the figures are reported in your financial statements, in your balance sheet, your profit and loss statement, and your cash flow statement.
So basically, an expert internal auditor has a working knowledge plus an expert knowledge. So working knowledge which covered the business processes, management policies, MIS, etc. All these are important for a good internal auditor. But an expert internal auditor will understand the internal controls. He will understand the enterprise risk management. That is the risk that the organization faces, the industry faces, and that's how it's able to give appropriate suggestions on how the organization can manage its risk. It understands the management principles which are very critical. Understanding these management principles are important for an internal auditor because those management principles are again imbibed in the business processes, in each of the business processes that you audit. Right? Accounting principles and techniques are relating to the laws of the land again, because in India, if you see, there is ICAI who has given their accounting standards. Then there would be in US, you would have US GAAP. So those accounting principles have to be understood by the internal auditor based on where it is auditing.
Okay, lastly, coming to the advanced, there is one more in the expert knowledge, which is fraud risk. So, again, fraud is something which is inherent as a risk in any organization. Worldwide, the latest survey talks about an average of about 5% of revenue being lost to corporate frauds. as an average across the globe. So fraud is a huge risk, and understanding how fraud risk works, what kind of risks are involved in terms of fraud when an organization operates, is something that an internal auditor is expected to know, because many of the internal controls which are designed to prevent fraud risk. So it is an important subject that you should have good expert level knowledge of.
Right.
Okay, coming to the advanced level knowledge, first we have the COSO framework. So we discussed what is COSO, the committee of sponsoring organizations, which have created this universal framework on how internal controls should be designed and implemented across organizations. So COSO framework should be something which you need to learn in detail. Now we have a detailed module which covers COSO framework in detail, which is a part of the internal control module. There are various chapters which are covering COSO framework in detail. So you will be getting those knowledge, advanced level knowledge from us through this course. Then you have the internal auditing standards. Again, as an internal auditor, you have to follow certain standards. These internal audit standards could be either defined by the accounting body of your country. Like in India, you have ICAI. So they could be defining these, or they could be defined by, there is something else which is defined by the Institute of Internal Auditors, which is the IPPF. Which the full form of IPPF is International Professional Practices Framework. This framework basically provides the standards which are required to be followed by an internal auditor who is certified by the Institute of Internal Auditors. So these standards are very important in terms of ensuring that the quality of work done by internal auditor is the best. They are giving the right kind of output. That quality output will be ensured only when the standards are followed. So if your work is reviewed by any of your peers, they would go and check whether the work conducted, the execution of internal audit conducted by you, the reporting done by you, the documentation maintained by you, is in compliance with some internal auditing standards which you are following, which is applicable to the company. As I said, the standards could either be given by the accounting body, or it could also be set by your company or by the firm in which you are working as an internal auditor, which is appointed by
So these internal
companies.
auditing standards and IPPA, which has been defined by the Institute of Internal Auditors, there is nothing that can be compromised here. So you have to comply in total in all these with all these standards. So partial compliance is also reported by your peers if your internal audit company is subject to audit by the peers. So compliance to internal audit standards of India or of any other country or the IIA is a must.
So to summarize, out of this whole list of subjects where you need to have working expert or advanced knowledge, we are going to cover in detail the concepts of risk management. We are going to cover internal controls. We are also going to cover the management principles in terms of the overall governance process. We are also going to cover COSO framework, and to some extent in between we are going to cover bits and pieces of internal auditing standards as well. That will be covered throughout in the way execution happens, will be basically guided by the internal auditing standards that we have.
So in IPPA we have already covered the independence and objectivity, which is a standard. So that's how it will be covered throughout this course. So without the internal auditing standards, you cannot do internal audit, or you cannot do a qualitative internal audit.
Right. So accounting principles and techniques is something that you will have to invest your own time in terms of gaining knowledge of that subject. And the subjects which we have listed in the working knowledge, there most of it will be part of the organization's documentation, which you will be reviewing before you start an internal audit. And IT security and information systems is something that you can gain knowledge on your own. Again, we are planning to bring a course on that as well, which will be somewhere in future, which you can avail.